Hello friend, welcome back to my kitchen. My name is Becky if you're new, and today we are making 3 springtime desserts. These have been on my list of things I want to make for quite some time, and I just never got around to making them for any of the last parties or dinners we've had. And so I thought, hey, let's just go ahead and make them for no other reason than I want to make them. So the first thing we're going to start with is actually a coconut cream pie. Then we're going to make a hummingbird cake, and we're going to make a gooey lemon cake. I happen to have in my freezer a pie crust. I tend to always have pie crust pre-made in my freezer. So all I had to do last night to have a homemade pie crust for today's recipe is I pulled it out of my freezer, and I'm going to go ahead and get it rolled out. I put this in my refrigerator and let it thaw in my refrigerator overnight, so it's the perfect consistency to roll it out today and bake it up. Anytime I need a pie crust, I always make 2, even if I only need 1, and then I throw the second one in the freezer for just like times like today. Perfect. So I have a little too big of a piece of butter in my pie crust right there. What I think I'm going to do is just go ahead and take that out. This is not going to be a big deal at all. You want chunks of butter in your pie crust, but you don't want one that large.
Today is just a fun day in the kitchen baking for no other reason than it's just fun to spend some time in the kitchen baking up some fun recipes. And the 2 recipes that are new to me are the coconut cream pie and the hummingbird cake. I've been wanting to make these all year, and today's the day that we're finally going to make them. And sometimes on baking days like this, we have little hiccups, but it is no big deal to fix a hole in this crust. I'm just going to steal some of the crust from the outer edge, patch the hole, and it's like nothing ever happened. So we do need to blind bake this crust. So once I have a nice pretty fluted edge, I'm going to take that piece of crumpled up parchment paper, line the crust with that, put baking beads in it, put this in the oven and bake it covered for about 15 minutes, and then we'll uncover it and cook it for another 15 minutes until it's fully cooked. Because once it's cooked and cooled, we're going to make the coconut cream custard to go into it. But while this crust is baking, we're going to actually make the cake for the hummingbird cake. And then by the time we're done making the batter for that, we'll pull this crust out, and then we can get the hummingbird cake in the oven. And while that is baking in the oven, we'll make our lemon cake. And while that is baking, we'll make our coconut custard. So it's going to be a little bit of musical ovens. We're going to be just rotating things in and out of the oven, and then everything will be baked and ready to go. And then the fun part of decorating the hummingbird cake and finishing off the coconut cream pie.
We need 2 cups of toasted pecans for our hummingbird cake. Since we have our oven preheated to the temperature we need to bake our hummingbird cake at, we might as well go ahead and get our hummingbird cake made so that it has time to cool, and then we can frost it. I did something really cute, and well, I think it's going to be cute, yesterday to prepare for today to decorate our hummingbird cake with. If you've never had a hummingbird cake, it's basically banana cake with pineapple and coconut, and it's so good. It's like the perfect springtime cake recipe. I wanted to make this for Easter, but I didn't get around to it. I also wanted to make the coconut cream pie for Easter. Didn't get around to it. And the lemon gooey cake is just fantastic. I wanted to make that today as well. We need 3 cups of mashed bananas. I wish my bananas were a little bit more ripe than this, but this is what ripeness I'm working with, and so this is what we're gonna make the cake with. It says that's about 6 bananas or so, so I'm gonna start with 5, mash it up using the help of the mixer, and then I'll pull it out and measure it to see when we get to 3 cups of mashed bananas. If I need to add 1 more banana, I certainly can do that. This recipe calls for 3 8-inch cake pans. I only have 2 9-inch cake pans, so I'm gonna make just a 2-layer cake instead of a 3-layer cake. I think that will be just fine. I'll just need to keep a close eye when I bake it to make sure that I don't overcook it or undercook it, because the cook time is definitely gonna be different using 3 cake pans instead of using 2 cake pans instead of using 3. Shoot, this is dripping. That is not quite 3 cups. We're at about 2.5. So I think 1 more banana is gonna get us to our 3 cups. I could smell these pecans. They are nice and toasted. They smell fantastic. I wanna stop the cooking process. So I'm gonna get these pecans onto another cookie sheet that's not hot, so they cool down quickly and we don't overcook our pecans. I hope this gets us to exactly 3 cups. Perfection right there. So now we can finish the rest of our cake. I just reread the recipe before getting started with actually adding all the ingredients into the mixer, and I realized it calls for 3 9-inch cake pans, not 3 8-inch cake pans. I don't think I'm gonna be able to cook it in just 2. I think the volume is gonna be too great, and I worry that the outside will dry out before the center is cooked. So I just called in a favor from my neighbor, and Josh is on his way over to a neighbor's house to save me, and I'm gonna borrow one of her 9-inch cake pans so that we can bake it into a 3-tiered cake. So now we need to put the bananas back into the mixer. The only reason I took them out was because I wanted to measure them to make sure I had the proper amount. And I'm gonna start adding my eggs with the mixer on, 1 at a time. Now I'm measuring out my neutral flavored oil, which in my case, I'm using avocado oil. Vanilla. Before I start adding the dry ingredients to my cake, I want to take the beads out so that my pie crust can continue to cook on the bottom, and actually the bottom part can get fully cooked. We'll give that another 10 minutes or so. I'm gonna take this off just while I add the dry ingredients so that I have a little bit more space here. We're gonna start off by adding our flour. Baking soda, baking powder, salt. I'm going to send my baking soda and baking powder through the sieve just to get any lumps out. Cinnamon, fresh nutmeg, Oh, that smells so good. White sugar, brown sugar, more brown sugar. We're gonna mix that together. This mixer is super full, so I'm glad my neighbor has a cake pan that I can borrow. So now I'm gonna add a can of crushed pineapple. That's an 8-ounce can. I'm gonna scrape the sides of the bowl and the bottom. It's very important to get the bottom of a mixer. I'm also gonna add some of our chopped pecans, not all of them, because we're gonna decorate the cake with some of them. And there is our cake batter. For some reason, I thought that there was coconut in that cake as well. There's not. It's just banana and pineapple. And I think, let me grab a pot holder. Our crust is almost done. I think I'm gonna give it another 2 minutes. It's showing up a little darker for you than me. The outside is basically done, but I want the inside a little bit more cooked. We did get a little bit of shrinkage around the sides, but I think that will be just fine. I should have built up the sides a little bit more, but we'll still fill this up with beautiful coconut cream and whipped cream, and it'll be just as delicious even though the crust doesn't come all the way up the sides. Josh just got back with the cake pans, which is perfect timing because our cake batter is ready to go into the oven and our pie crust is done. So I was cooking this pie crust at 400. I just reduced the temperature to 350 because that's what we need to cook our cakes at. So we're gonna let this cool. So my neighbor's cake pans are a little bit different, but they are, well, you know, they're a little bit smaller. That'll be fine. I think if I tried to fit all this batter in 2 of my cake pans, it would have been way too much batter. So I'm glad I was able to borrow a friend's cake pan. I'm gonna bake these for about 30 minutes. I'm gonna keep a close eye on this one because I think it's gonna take a little less time to bake. I think the next thing we're gonna make is going to be the gooey lemon cake. This is a really awesome cake because it's a 1-pan cake. You don't need to frost it. It is absolutely delicious. And then we can cook it in this oven. As soon as these come out, we can pop it in the oven because the coconut cream is already done baking. All we have to do is bake the shell. We don't actually need to bake the pudding that we're gonna make in just a bit. The first thing we're gonna do for the lemon gooey cake is we're going to oil a springform pan. So there's no frosting or anything we need to make for this. Once we bake this in the springform pan, it's done. So it's just one of those really easy desserts. And the first time I saw this recipe was on Instagram, and I've actually only made it once, but it turned out so good. I wanted to show you all how delicious this recipe is. I'm gonna start by adding a 1/2 cup of butter and 3/4 of a cup of white sugar to the mixing bowl. And we are gonna be using the whisk attachment for this. And we're gonna mix this together. I just added 1 egg and I blended that together. Now I'm gonna add our vanilla. And the recipe calls for lemon zest and lemon juice. I have some freeze-dried lemon zest I'm gonna add to this, along with some freshly squeezed lemon juice. This was just in my freezer and I pulled it out of my freezer last night. We're gonna add 2 tablespoons of that. There's still a few ice chunks in there. Now we're gonna add all-purpose flour, baking powder, and salt. Mix that together. I'm gonna scrape the sides 1 time and the bottom, making sure we got everything, and mix it 1 more time. This recipe did not state when we make the cake portion it didn't explicitly state to use the whisk attachment, but in the directions it kept referring to each step, whiskin, whiskin, whiskin. So I am using the whisk attachment. You could probably get away with using the paddle attachment, but just going off what the written portion of the directions say, I'm using the whisk attachment. Now this is the cake portion. The next part we're gonna make is the cream portion, and that portion of the recipe does explicitly state, use the whisk attachment to whisk these ingredients together. So now that we have the cake portion done, we're gonna add this to our prepared baking dish. So I wanna make sure that I get all the cake batter out of the bowl, or as much as I can. And then I still have a lot of cake batter in the whisk attachment. So we're gonna take a second here to get all this goodness out of this whisk attachment. Now I'm just gonna work this batter into the bottom of this springform pan. I normally would probably rinse this out, but I'm not worried about it because all of this is gonna go into the cake. And so we're just gonna go ahead and use the same mixer to make the lemon cream portion. Now we need 6 ounces of cream cheese for this. So I just cut that at the 6 ounce mark. I got this cream cheese out a few hours ago from the fridge, so it's nice and room temperature because we're gonna need cream cheese for this. Plus we're gonna need a lot of cream cheese for the cream cheese frosting for the Hummingbird cake. And so I pulled all the cream cheese out of the refrigerator to come to room temperature because it's a lot easier to make frosting and this part of this cake if we have room temperature cream cheese. Now I'm gonna take this off because we need 3 cups of powdered sugar. And sometimes powdered sugar can be a little clumpy. So I'm gonna go ahead and run it through this sieve. And 3. Now we're gonna whisk this together. I'm gonna start really slow and I'm gonna just kind of pulse it to start. And this is not a frosting, we're gonna bake this with the cake. Now we're gonna add 1 egg and a tablespoon of lemon zest. So this is the gooey portion of the lemon gooey cake. It's almost like a cream cheese type frosting that's baked. I already pulled the Hummingbird cakes out of the oven and they're cooling. They've actually been cooling for about 10 minutes, so we can get them out of the cake pans and onto a cooling rack. This now needs to cook for 30 to 40 minutes. It's gonna puff up, it's gonna get golden brown, and then we'll be able to take it out of the oven. We're collecting quite a little array over here. So the cake in this pan did come out of the oven about 5 minutes before these 2 cakes did. Looks like they separated from around the edge really well. Oh, look at that. Perfect. The parchment paper even stayed in the pan. Once our gooey lemon cake comes out of the oven, we won't need the oven any longer because this cake is done and the next thing we're gonna make is the pudding on the stove. So for the pie, the coconut cream pie, I wanna toast some sweetened coconut so that we can have a nice toasty coconut to go on the top of our pie. You could totally skip this step, but toasted coconut is one of my favorite things. And I love sweetened toasted coconut. So that's probably way more than I need for decoration. I just need enough to decorate the top of the pie. And it will also add a nice little crunch to the pie. Maybe a little more. I'm gonna get this into the oven while my cake is baking so that I can use my oven for 2 things at once. Put my cake over there and my coconut over there. While these were toasting, I got out all the ingredients we need to make the pudding for the coconut cream pie. We're done using the mixer for just a bit. We still need to make the frosting and the whipped cream, but I need to clean the mixer because it had egg in it. And so or the mixing bowl. So I have the mixing bowl in the sink. Whoop. And I'm gonna go ahead and get going on my pudding for the coconut cream pie, because I need the pudding to cool before we can actually put the whipped cream on it, and I need the cakes to fully cool before we can decorate them. So we might as well get the pudding going next. So what I've got in this saucepan, you wanna make sure you have a nice heavy duty bottomed saucepan. I'm gonna go ahead and add 1 can of full fat coconut milk. So we're gonna get some of that coconut flavor from the milk and from the coconut. Now this recipe does say to use coconut extract. I don't have that. So adding the toasted coconut is gonna give us, I think, what we need to really have this be a very coconutty coconut cream pie. So I already have 1 cup of half and half in my pot. So in the US, half and half is half cream, half milk. So if you don't have half and half and you wanna make this, do a half a cup of cream and half a cup of milk, and that'll give you half and half. I think those are the only 2 ingredients we actually put in the pan to be, oh no, we need the sugar too, because we want the sugar to dissolve. So to our milk, we're gonna add 2/3 cup of sugar and a good pinch of salt. Just gonna give this a little bit of a stir. Now we're gonna cook this until it comes to a simmer. While that's starting to simmer, we're going to separate our eggs. We need 4 egg yolks. To that, we're gonna add a 1/4 cup of cornstarch or tapioca starch. And whisk that together. And this is what's gonna thicken our pudding. I'm gonna measure out the last few ingredients we're gonna add once our pudding is done being cooked. We need 1 cup of coconut and 2 tablespoons of butter. That'll melt with the hot pudding. Last but not least, vanilla. And this is when you would add the coconut extract if you had coconut extract. I've just been tidying up a little bit while this has been simmering away. It's been simmering for about 2 minutes. The sugar is completely dissolved, so we can go ahead and start thickening our pudding. So what we're gonna do is we need to temper our egg and cornstarch mixture, which is just a fancy word for we need to bring this up to a hotter temperature before we add it in there. Otherwise, we're gonna scramble our eggs. I'm gonna turn the heat down on my stove. And how I'm gonna do this is just slowly, oh, that's my timer. That's the timer for the lemon cake, and it's not quite done yet. So we're gonna get this in here real quick, and then our cake should be ready to come out of the oven. I always go way overboard, and I add way more of the warm mixture to the egg mixture because I'm always paranoid. I'm just feeling the side of the bowl. That's probably good there. So now we whisk this and slowly pour our eggs into the pot. You can see that there's some cornstarch on the bottom there. Oh, this is already starting to thicken up quite a bit. Oh yeah, it's pretty viscous now at this point. You can see that, how it's thickening up. So this is done. I need to get this out of the oven before I finish our pudding. It's browned, it's puffed, and we need this to cool. So I'm going to put it on the stove so that it has a little more circulation and it can cool this way. And then I can turn my oven off because we don't need it anymore. So the pudding is here and it's nice and smooth. We still need to melt our butter in there. That's gonna add some really delicious creaminess and just buttery flavor, along with all of our coconut and our vanilla. Ooh, that vanilla, as soon as it touched that hot pudding mixture, smells delicious. Now we need to stir this until our butter melts. So I just grabbed my crust, and you can see on the bottom how beautifully browned that is. So that's exactly what we want. And now we have our pudding. Our butter is fully melted and incorporated. And we're gonna take our warm pudding and we're actually gonna pour it into our crust. It looks like this is gonna fit perfectly, even though our crust shrank just a little bit. We don't want a skin to form on the top of this pudding, so we're gonna take and cover it right on the top. And we're gonna pop this in the fridge for quite a few hours before we top it with our whipped cream and our toasted coconut. The time that I've been waiting for, we get to decorate the cake because the cake has now cooled enough, the Hummingbird cake, that it is safe to frost. You never wanna frost a hot cake because then the frosting will melt right off the cake. So I did wash out my stand mixer and my paddle attachment really well so that we can just make the frosting right in this mixer. I have 2 sticks of butter and 2 blocks of cream cheese here that I'm gonna get into the mixer. This has been sitting at room temperature since this morning. I'm gonna cream this together until it's nice and creamy and smooth. Now I'm gonna add my powdered sugar. I'm gonna start with that, and I'm gonna add some vanilla. This is just your generic cream cheese frosting recipe. And there's our frosting. Before I decorate the cake, I'm gonna get this cake in the fridge, and I'm just gonna run a knife along the edge to kind of break it off. So hopefully it comes out of this springform pan nicely. Maybe should have done this when it hadn't sat for so long. All right, the moment of truth. Here we go. It's beautiful. So I'm gonna pop this in the fridge so that it can set up. You have heard me talk about the restaurant Papa Haydn's that's in Portland many times, and the first time I ever heard or had a Hummingbird cake was at that restaurant. We used to go there all the time, and if you haven't heard me talk about it, it's a really fancy dessert place in Portland, downtown. And when I was in high school and college, mostly high school, me and my friends, after we would go to the movies, we would go there and get a fancy dessert and French fries. And there was just some really, really good desserts there. And there still are. I just haven't been there in a long time. And they had a Hummingbird cake. And I'm going to decorate it the way that they used to decorate it. They probably still do if they make this cake, I don't know. But let me go back to yesterday. I'm gonna show you how I made these and how we're gonna turn these pineapple dehydrated slices into flowers that are gonna go on the top of this cake.
This is something that I've wanted to do since I saw this cake at Papa Haydn's probably, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And today is the day we're finally doing it, and it honestly could not be any easier. All you need to do is get yourself a fresh pineapple, remove the top, the bottom, and the skins, and then we're just gonna slice them in thin rounds. Now I did, like this one, I didn't get a complete circle, so we'll just set that to the side and we'll eat that. But I did try to cut as evenly as possible, and I tried to make sure that it was a complete circle, and you'll see why in just a bit. I also went ahead and left in the core because you're going to see how the core kind of creates the center of the flower. Once I have the rounds all sliced, I'm going to go ahead and put them onto a dehydrator tray. I happen to have a dehydrator tray, and this works absolutely perfect for this. If you don't have a dehydrator tray, you could probably do this in your oven on the lowest setting your oven has, and just keep a very close eye on it, and you might want to rotate and flip the pineapples while they're drying in the oven. I put this in a 300 and about 30 degree dehydrator for about 18 hours. So we're just gonna get this turned on, let it sit, and then we're gonna use these pineapple rounds to decorate our cake.
So you can see I wasn't sure how they were gonna turn out, but they look really beautiful. And they're not in the flower shape yet, but I'm gonna show you how we're gonna get them into the flower shape, if I can. But first, we need to frost our cake. And got my cake stand here. I'm gonna make a few sheets of parchment paper so that we can keep our cake stand nice and tidy. Our cakes are perfectly cooled, so we can start stacking our cakes. This one right here is the one I believe, yes, that's the little bit smaller one, just by a little bit. So that's gonna be our middle cake. Little frosting on the bottom. Woo! Feels about even. Now I'm going to take frosting and fill in those cracks. Hopefully I have enough frosting. I don't want my cake to fall over, so I'm going to use my mom's advice and just take a few skewers. Oh, that one, it's a little too long. And skewer my cake. I was able to fill in all the crevices, and now I'm just adding frosting. And then once I get all the frosting on the cake, I will make it look pretty, hopefully. That's the goal. I think we're gonna have just the right amount of frosting to get this cake frosted. You can see why I put parchment paper down, because it is hard to keep it totally neat. Or for me, nearly impossible. So I'm pushing any excess frosting from the top down to the sides. This is just a rough frosting first coat around, then I'll go through and try to make it look pretty.
When it comes to this frosting, I'm not looking for a perfectly smooth finish. I do want a little bit of some rustic elements to it, and mostly that's just because I have not mastered the art of getting a perfectly smooth frosting, and so we're just going to go with kind of a little bit more rustic look. So my original goal here was to decorate the top of the cake using these pineapple flowers, because that is how the inspiration cake that I'm getting inspired by did it, but I could not get my pineapple flowers. They would stay in a flower shape for about 10 seconds and then they wanted to just open up. And then my goal was to put the toasted pecans around the bottom edge. So we'd have flowers on the top and then toasted pecans around the bottom. But I couldn't get the flowers to stay in a flower shape. So I had the thought, what if I put these flowers on the side of the cake and I use the frosting that's on the side of the cake. I push the center in, and that frosting kind of holds the flower shape in place. So that's what I decided to do. So I cleaned up the top of the frosting on the top of the cake, and then I went ahead and I took my pineapple flowers and I kind of did like a every other, like one low, one high, one low, one high, and I stuck my pineapple flowers on the side of the cake, and that worked perfectly. So here you can kind of see that my frosting is definitely a little bit on the rustic, whimsical look. Now, once I remove the parchment paper, it looks a lot neater. Right now with the frosting like all over the parchment paper, it looks more messy than it does when it's finally done. But I think this cake turned out so cute. I love it. And it was absolutely delicious. The banana and pineapple just made for an absolutely moist and very delicious cake. It was not overly sweet, and I really liked that I had the crunch of the pecans in there. It really definitely, I think, brought it over the top. If you don't like pecans, you could use walnuts too, or if you don't like nuts, go ahead and leave the nuts out. But this is what our hummingbird cake looks like, and I think it's super, super pretty.
I just cleaned out this bowl, and we're gonna make the whipped cream for our coconut cream pie. That's heavy whipping cream, powdered sugar, and we're gonna whisk this together until it's light and fluffy. We get to go ahead and put our whipped cream on our pie. This is all done. I got it wiped off. It served us well throughout this cooking day. You can see just how beautiful our pudding's set up. And we don't have a skin on it because we put the plastic wrap on it. Let's see. I was kind of wanting to go for a rustic look on this. You can pipe your whipped cream on too if you want. I was kind of hoping it would just be piled on the top. And then we're gonna put our crunchy toasted coconut bits on the top. Friend, here we have it. We have our 3 springtime desserts, our hummingbird cake with beautiful pineapple flowers, our coconut cream pie with toasted coconut, and our gooey lemon cake with powdered sugar on the top. If you want to try making any of these recipes yourself, I will link the ones that I followed today down in the description box, and that is where you will be able to find them. I am so excited that I finally got those done, and I am so happy with how these turned out. I may have snacked on one of these dried pineapples, and they are so delicious. So not only are they a cute little garnish, but they taste pretty darn good as well. If you are new, thank you for being here, and I would love to have you subscribe. We do a lot of baking and gardening where I'm gonna be heading right now to go enjoy the sunshine. If you've been here before, thank you yet again for taking time out of your day to spend time with me. I greatly appreciate that. And if you want to watch some of my other videos between now and my next upload, I will pop a couple videos here you can go enjoy. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being you. And I can't wait to see you next time. Bye, friend.